turn it over to the speakers.
Okay, great. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be moderating so much as we're having a group discussion. So I guess since I was called on, I'll just give you just a general idea of the format. And then we're going to do self-introductions. Katie's going to start us off about the process of hiring an architect. So a couple of like the roles of co-housing architects and different roles. And then we're going to go into, we have brainstormed a list of topics. We'll go through it and each one of us will kind of hit one of those topics, see if there's enough fodder for conversation. And then if not, then we can come back and address some of the other topics. But that's kind of what the format we thought might work. So with that, I will, I guess I can just go, well, yeah. Well, Katie, why don't you go ahead and you can start.
Yeah, so just a brief introduction. I was a founding architect partner with McCamant and Dread Architects and did that for about 20 years. And then I moved over to the evil developer side. And so I've gone from being, the person putting out proposals to clients and groups, and now I advise groups on hiring architects and working with architects. So, and I've worked with many communities in a wide variety of different ways. So I'll just leave it at that. Mary, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. All right, Mary Kraus. I'm also an architect, and I've been working with co-housing communities for about 30 years as an architect and also as a, participatory process, running participatory process. And I've been living in co-housing for 25 years. I'm at Pioneer Valley Co-housing, which was the first co-housing community built in the Eastern US 26 years ago.
Well, I'm Molly Jones. I'm the newbie on the block by a long shot with these three amazing ladies. So, but I am an architect. I'm located in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we are the architects of record. We're working alongside Brian Bowen's helping us out. So those of you who were in the previous one, you know that, but we are the architects on the Heartwood Commons Tulsa co-housing project, the first co-housing in Tulsa, second one in Oklahoma. And I hope it's not my last co-housing project. So I love co-housing. I think it's amazing. I can't wait to build one to move into. Anyway, we'll just leave it at that for today. So.
And it's great to have you here, Molly. And I love the fact that you're willing to do another one. So Mary and Katie and I are part of a small group of architects that have been willing to do more than one. I feel like there's probably at least 50 or so architects that have done one and none, like one and done. We're not ever doing that again. And so I'm Grace Kim. I'm an architect and one of the founders of Schemata Workshop. We're an architecture firm here in Seattle, Washington. And co-housing is part of the universe of projects that we work on. I'm also the founder of Capitol Hill Urban Co-housing, which is a 9-unit community in the heart of Capitol Hill, which is a very dense urban neighborhood in Seattle, and was made popular or famous, I don't know about popular, famous by the CHOP this summer. That happened outside my doors. And I think that I'll leave it at that for now. And Katie, do you want to kick us off with how to hire an architect?
Yes, indeed. So I thought I'd start with just a little bit about the process of hiring architects. So I think first of all is who are you looking for? And I feel very strongly, actually, that the bottom line is you are looking for a housing architect who has experience in the similar scale of what you're doing. Right, so if you're doing an urban project with the podium parking, you want an architect who's done podium parking and urban projects before, and so whether or not they have co-housing experience, I think one of the mistakes that many communities have at least looked at is that there's some green builder who did 2 really cool super townhouses, and they want to do your 30-unit co-housing project. Yeah, I'd say you really don't want to be their learning process. So they could potentially team with a larger architect, but you're really, I mean, I personally just feel that co-housing groups don't have the budgets to be research and development companies where you're helping your professionals learn things they didn't know before. It's a very painful process. So I think that that's really the bottom line. And then the other question is where's the co-housing experience come from in your architecture team? And we'll talk about through the session a number of different ways you can do that. So you don't necessarily need an architect that's done co-housing before if you have other ways to bring that in. So either as Mary as a consultant or Grace as a consulting architect, or sometimes I play that role. So somewhere you want to bring in the co-housing experience, both for process and design. And in fact, and one of the things I just see over and over again is that it's very difficult for people to imagine what it's actually like to live in a co-housing community if they've never done it. And so architects are used to sort of, designing things that are not their own experience. That's what we're trained to do, is to develop the program and to hear what they want, not out of our own experience, but out of a client's experience. But I find everybody, it's not just architects, they just, the way you actually live in a co-housing community versus the way you think you will is really quite different. So you want somebody on your team who really has that day-to-day experience and has experienced it. Working with a lot of different co-housing groups to help them hire their team, I would recommend that you would, there's sort of an order of how do you bring on your professionals. And the first sort of category is sort of, there's either a developer or development consultant. That tends to be where I come in. An attorney to help you organize your documents, potentially a process consultant, and then your architect. It's right there in one of your very first decisions, because even before you have land, you want to know who you're going to call when you start looking at sites. So often if you're when you're buying property, you don't have time to take several months to find the right architect. So I think it's better for most groups if they've made that decision ahead of time and then can start to, as soon as you're looking at sites, know who you're calling to help you sort out the zoning and the process for an approval. So I think that it's important for co-housing communities to really make a deliberate process and make a deliberate decision about their architect, because it's a long and sometimes challenging relationship. In the best case scenarios, in the early stages, you're going to fall in love with your architect. You think they're fabulous. Sometime in the middle, you will decide that they're terrible and you're ready to fire them. And hopefully it all comes back around at the end. And it's because you are really putting into the architect's hands, help us build our utopia. And, groups, we're all unrealistic about budgets and what's possible, and surely they can work these miracles if they're brilliant. And this, so we put a lot on architects, and they get to ride the ups and downs of the development process very closely with you. So it is one of the professionals you will have the most interaction with as a community through the process. So therefore, you want to make sure that you're making the right decision and that the whole community is on board, right? Whatever the community is at that stage. Very often the decision about the architects early on, and you might be, 3 to 6 households. But you want to know why you chose that architect so that as people move forward and come into your community, you can explain why you chose this architect, that you did look around, you made a deliberate decision in doing that. The way that I generally recommend that groups do that is with the request for proposals, or RFP process. Look around at your options, look around, both locally and nationally, and see who you're interested in talking with and getting proposals from. Understand a little bit about their models. That might be a few phone calls. Does Grace work in this part of the country? Or maybe she'd like to partner with the local. How far will Molly travel? These sorts of questions, trying to get a sense of whether they're a viable option for you. And then getting to a short list of 3 to 4 architects. If you go out to proposals to more architects than that, a lot of architects will just figure it's not worth their time. So you want to get down to a short list. You don't want to go out to 10 and ask them all to put proposals together. It's a lot of work, and you really want to respect people's time. So don't waste people's time. So you get a short list. What I generally do is help communities write up a request for proposals, and with the very specific things. And my approach is to ask for fees. And a lot of times groups don't even have a site at that time. So we are literally making up a program that architects can attach a fee proposal to, so that you can get to apples and apples. That's what we're really trying to do, is to get to apples and apples so you can make a good decision, because you understand what each firm offers, how they work, and what at least the range of their fees are. You know, obviously, if an architect's given you fees for a project before there was a property, they're going to adjust them once there's a real program. But you get the apples and apples comparison. And I do that because, you know, there's a wide range of architecture firms and models. And I personally know, particularly in the San Francisco, I came out of UC Berkeley. So I know a lot of architects in the Bay Area. And there's a lot of people I'd love to work with. And frankly, a co-housing group can't afford them. So I want to get to, like, is this the right, you know, it's not that you're making decisions on the lowest fees, but there's something that you could actually manage in your budget. And you know, we can talk about fabulous collaborative processes and bringing in all these team members, but I don't know that you can afford to bring in all these team members and pay them. So that's, and then so we get the responses to the RFP come in, then we do a series of interviews with the architect, and then the community decides who do they really feel, you know, works for them. And some of that is really around who do you feel is hearing you and you're connecting with, right? Because again, you are, you know, asking the architect to really create the physical manifestation of your vision and, you know, this community you're working so hard with. So that's the basic process I use, an RFP process. Sometimes there is an architect that's been in your area that you might have, you know, brought in to help look at sites along the way. And so there are occasionally times when there really is an obvious architect that you're already in a relationship. That was the case with Heartwood in Tulsa with Molly, is that they had been going to co-housing conferences together. They knew each other pretty well. She was really practically a member of the group without being a member of the group. And so they didn't do an RFP process. They said, this is who we want to work with. And, you know, we got these and made it work from there. So that's just a short thing about how to hire an architect and the process and what you're looking for. And I will now hand off to, I believe next is roles, and Grace, you're going to start that one.
Okay, so in terms of rules, there are kind of, I'll say three ways that we'll talk about it today. There's probably a myriad of other ways, but I have oftentimes served in the role of a co-housing architect, meaning that I understand co-housing. We provide full services, and what that means is that, you know, from programming and site selection all the way through the design and the permitting and the construction phases, we can take you through the whole process. And I won't go into the details of that if people want to know, like, what exactly does that mean? That could be a whole session in itself. But we help you, like, dream and brainstorm all the things you want. We help you with the design process and show you different options. We take the permits through the local entitlement process of land use and construction. And then we tend to be involved during construction, attending weekly site meetings and serving as your advocates throughout the process to make sure what you're paying for is what we actually designed. We have, I used to be proud of the fact that I was a pretty decent facilitator and that we could do that. And to Katie's point, on a few projects, you know, found ourselves like in the midst of schematic design, as the group is storming, that all of a sudden we were the brunt of, it's the architect's fault. Everything is the architect's fault. And so I'll probably go into that a little bit more later, but I would say as a result, we have are hiring a separate facilitator so that while we're in the design meetings and while we're in the early, especially the early dreaming stages, I have a separate facilitator that is wearing their facilitator hat. That way I don't have to figuratively take these on and off and have people confused. But that's kind of what the one piece that I would add to the way that we're doing our work. As a way to pass it over to Mary, we try to have a global impact, but work locally. So outside of the Cascadia region, which is kind of Vancouver, Seattle, or Vancouver, Washington, Oregon, and parts of Idaho. Outside those areas, we will always look to a local. And I always, whenever I get RFPs from across the country, I say, do you have a local architect that you've been talking to? And oftentimes they say no, and oftentimes they tell me later, well, actually, we kind of have. It's helpful to be upfront with that. But we will always look for a local because it's important. And you'll understand why when I pass it over to Mary to talk about her role as a consulting architect.
Yeah. So when I'm working as a consulting architect, as opposed to, doing the whole thing, that's, that's a lot of what I do. So I will collaborate with your local architect, and your local architect has all the expertise and familiarity with the local zoning, relationships with the local boards, just knowledge of the area, the specific geography, the specific climate. And hopefully you also hire a local architect who has, whatever particular expertise is important to you, like sustainable design or accessible design, or whatever some of your main goals might be. I come in and bring the co-housing expertise, which includes running participatory design workshops. So that is, helping the group work together to generate your ideas and make decisions on what you want. And so it's bringing those two expertises together. So it's facilitating the group, helping people to build what I'm fond of saying is the co-housing consultant is the co-housing architecture consultants doing their job well if they're helping you to build your social community in the process of designing the physical community. So it's not just about the nuts and bolts and where the houses or apartments are situated and where the common house is and all of that. But I'm also bringing in the expertise about co-housing and what works well for co-housing design. And so there's running the workshops, and then there's also staying in collaboration with the local architect as things move forward. We will have an intensive design session after your weekend workshops where we generate initial ideas. But then beyond that, I like them to consult with me as the project moves forward because they have their expertise, but they might not actually know how to design a common house kitchen. And so if I come back in a couple months later at the next stage of design and go, oh, wait a minute, you really have to, configure it this way, or it's not going to be a sociable kitchen, for instance. Anyway, so it's a nice combination of different kinds of strengths, and it makes for good collaboration.
And I think to kind of tag on to that, Mary, just for a minute, if I might, is to just kind of like encourage you to make sure that if you're partnering with a local architect ahead of bringing a co-housing expert architect onto the team, to make sure that they get what you're doing, right? Make sure they're at least passionate about housing and community development and being able to have a starting point to understand what's coming out of that co-housing architect that's coming on board. So I would just kind of like add that, because I think that's really important. If you get an architect that just doesn't care about it, or has interest in other areas, that's the way I'll say it. And that can be detrimental in that they have a huge learning curve, right? They not only don't have the housing experience, they also don't have the desire necessarily for it. So I think it's really important to attempt to screen those local architects to make sure you've at least got that spark of passion there for it to start with.
I'll just tag one little thing onto your tag too, is you want to have someone who's a good collaborator. I mean, you know, I feel like I've collaborated with all kinds of great architects across the continent, whatever. You know, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I've had very good luck with that. But
Oh, no.
Molly, that might be a good segue for you to talk about your role as the local architect.
Yeah, well, it's really what Mary explained, right? That what the local architect brings is that knowledge of how to like maneuver the process at the local level. And they usually know kind of who's who down at the city or the planning department, and can help kind of smooth that pathway out for the development. Oh, wait, did we lose her altogether? So that's really, you know, she really covered it, I think, very nicely. So I'm going to cover just really quickly. And we covered it in the last session that Brian Bowen and I did. We talked a little bit about the three-legged stool. And so I'm sorry for those of you who were in that session, you're going to hear it again. But we're taught it very early on in college that you've got three things that you have to deal with. You've got a price, you've got quality, and you've got a schedule to meet. And you can only have two of the three because the third one needs to basically serve as a relief valve for the other two. So you can set price, you can set schedule, but then you have to be flexible on quality. Yeah, right. So any of those three can be the one that you're flexible on, or any of those three can be one that's kind of a non-negotiable for you, or a pain point that you need to make sure you address in your project. So we're going to just kind of to stimulate some conversation and some questions. We're each going to go around and talk about one of our kind of top 10s on hiring an architect. And I think we'll go ahead and start with Katie, and then we'll hit Mary, and then Grace.
Yeah, great. So I think one of the things is when you hire an architect, you are hiring someone that comes with decades of experience. They have thought more about floor plans than you ever could have considered. And so, you know, I think one of the things I find co-housing groups is they really don't appreciate what comes with professional experience. And so, you know, there's a danger word. I always tell anybody working with co-housing groups, never say, just trust me. But I'm going to tell you to trust your architects, hire people you can trust. And a lot of times communities will spend enormous amount of time debating between two possibilities in a floor plan. And it's like 55 to 45, right? It's percent. It's like you as a community are split. Trust your architect. You don't have to struggle through every decision. You can hand it back to your professionals and say, wow, you know, what do you think we should do? Yeah, why don't we do that? Because we as a community are split on it. So I think just really using your professionals for what they have done. I mean, everybody on the call here, probably any architect you're going to hire has literally spent decades studying floor plans, trying to figure out how to meet a budget, what is the most energy efficient approach, you know, what is code. So, you know, you do not need to reinvent all that. You can draw from their experience and spend more time focusing as a community on how you want to live there, the relationships and the culture you're trying to create. Oh, should I hand off to somebody else?
all right. So so I think what I was going to talk about is putting your energy into the common house versus your individual home. So as co-housing clients working with an architect, you want to start with a mindset that your homes are actually secondary. And this can be, you know, given the culture that we're in here, in this country, that could be counterintuitive. But I actually always tell, you know, when groups are wanting to hire me to collaborate and run their participatory design workshops, I always tell them the site and common house workshops are really important. The units, you know, glad to do it for you. It's secondary. And so likewise, in your budget, you have a limited budget to go around. So satisfy yourselves with standard units, and then more of the budget can go to the common house, which is the shared, you know, the center of your community. you know, and make sure you communicate that to your architect, or you really want to hire an architect who understands that that's your priority. You know, they're not going to be designing your custom homes. You can, you know, do what you want in your home later, but, you know, focus your energy on the common facilities.
Grace?
And
So yeah, my tip was going to be to use your program, your building program, as your benchmark. And I say that because we spend so much time in the early stages working with the community and kind of daydreaming and writing. We write down, I think all of us write down the exact program of what the uses are going to be, what the room size is, and lots of assumptions that we've made at that point. And what I find is that I'll get to construction and somebody will say, oh, I never looked at the drawings because I don't know how to read the drawings. Or I didn't know that we had patios that were 6 feet up in the air. You know, things that are like, we've been issuing drawings and sending them all to the community. And if you didn't understand, like as an owner, that is your job. Your job is to read or look at the drawings. If you don't understand, you need to get with a buddy or ask your architect to walk them through or something. But it's your job to understand what the architect has provided to you, and to give them approval to move forward. So if you've gotten all the way through design and you're in construction and now you're surprised about something, that's when usually architects get yelled at and it's all our fault. But really, it's on the owners. That is in terms of being an owner, that is your responsibility. So what I would say is, if you have a building program, when you get the first set of drawings, go back and look at the building program. Oftentimes what I say to my staff is, use the building program when you're done with SD, make sure we've checked off all of the different things. And there are going to be times where, as a community, you might say to your owners or to your architects, we really want the ability to open the back door and let our dogs run outside and go pee and come back in without having to go outside. You know, great, that's a great thing. We wrote it down in the program, but as we went over time, like that was a desire expressed by half a dozen people. But it was something that the whole group said, yeah, that's a worthwhile value. We should incorporate that into the drawings. But there was an overarching, desire for universal design, so making everything accessible. There was a desire to stay within the budget. There was the realities of our stormwater code, of codes in general, and the actual topography and how much dirt can we move. So by the time that we get to, the final drawings and we're setting it in for permit, there might be a variety of reasons why we weren't able to make that one thing happen. And, it would be great if I could go back and tell you each one of those things that I couldn't do, but really it's up to the owners, and maybe you all as a group can create a subcommittee of like, let's make sure that we all understand what we're, in for. Because it's not fair to then later say to the architect, well, we thought that this was in the case, and then we've been telling everybody this. Like, I understand that that's a painful place to be, but it's okay. We just need to move on. But really, the owners need to take responsibility. So I would encourage you to use your program. It's not just a doorstop. Use that in looking at evaluating whether the architects are actually delivering what you think they're delivering.
So I'll tag on to that just a second for a minute and just say that like your values, your community values should be reflected in your program, and you use your values and your program for every decision that you make through the project, so that you're consistent with your mission and your values. So the one thing that I wanted to just bring to the table just for a moment is just to encourage you to get a rudimentary understanding of what the design process is that architects and engineers go through to bring your project about, so that you have an understanding of when things need to happen. And your architect will be more than happy to sit down with you and walk you through it. Katie is fantastic at walking you through it. But just make sure that you kind of understand, like, what are the levers that we can pull at different times to be able to execute the project. So one question that came up, are we ready to take a couple of questions? Okay. So one that came up is that in a time where we see what climate change is doing to unprepared areas, Texas is an obvious example right now where infrastructure is failing. doesn't it make sense for us to invest in insulation, et cetera, that actually historically wouldn't be necessary in environments that don't typically see these severe temperature swings? And because we need to think about like climate change and how that's impacting design over time. So I don't know who wants to field that one. Everybody? Okay.
Grace and I both do.
Great.
Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, that absolutely. That's very much one of the principles of sustainable design and resilient design. The climate is changing, and so in all places you want to design not only to the current climate, but to the future climate, to the future possible disasters, whether it's high winds or freezing or whatever, power outages, and those are community scale too. Like, can the common house be an area of refuge? Make the common house more resilient than the rest of the community, for instance, and think about how you as a community will respond to different crises and design to support that.
Yeah, exactly. Grace, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, the thing that I'll add on, I would just echo what Mary said about resiliency. Like, that is something that we just have to think about. But it's not a thing where, like, the interesting thing for me when that came up, when a friend of mine told me he lost, power and his pipes burst, is that I was shocked that in a climate where it's so hot, that they wouldn't have had the insulation there for the opposite reason. Like where I live, insulation is a given. Like we go above and beyond what the national standards are for our energy code and what we do for insulation and things like that, because we're trying to protect from the cold. But at the same time, that same principle, as we have been seeing climate change in our area, it's gotten warmer and warmer here. Like, we have summers that are 90 degrees for more than weeks at a time. That never used to happen when I was a kid. And so, that same insulation allows my unit to be cooler when it's hot like that, just as much as it allowed me to be warmer when it was cold. So along those lines, what I was surprised was, like, why were the architects in Texas not insulating their buildings? Because that would actually make their cooling costs in the summertime lower. So I think that, it's funny to me. It's like, what forces are at play? What industry group was lobbying to get rid of the insulation? Was it the air conditioning contractors that were encouraging the less use of insulation or something? But seriously, I think yes, we should be thinking about those things, but don't think of it as an investment for the one-off situation. It actually benefits you in the long run to be in Texas insulating your buildings for the heat of the summer.
Analysts, let me read a question from the chat. This is from Carol in Delaware. Please confirm the suggested order of hiring: developer/development consultant, lawyer, process consultant, and architect. The question is about sequencing, in your opinion. Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think that really the first hire is very, very, very few co-housing groups are ready to hire anybody in the beginning. So what you really need is you need someone that will help you learn to be a good client and help you understand the process. So I am often the first hire these days as a development consultant. It wouldn't, obviously there are others, but I think that if you have a friend, in the way that Molly was a friend of Heartwood, she could help them understand the process as a friend of the community before they hired her as an architect. But I would say that, increasingly it's really a process consultant that helps you get organized as a community and learn to be a good client. You need an attorney early on, but if you have an attorney, if that's your first hire, you're likely to spend way too much because you're probably not clear what you need and where to go. So it is, an attorney is often one of the earliest, but if they're, like I say, they need some very clear direction or you'll spend too much money on legal fees. So they often, so I would suggest you want somebody in your group or one of your professionals who can explain the development process and what you're trying to do and bring in the sort of best practices experience.
Let me, as a past client, comment on that. What I found to be the most helpful use of all our professionals was they helped the group to understand what were the critical decisions. Among the hundreds of issues that we were dealing with, what was the critical ones? And that provided the group direction, and so we didn't go down so many rabbit holes. And that's where somebody that has been through the co-housing process can really give you perspective that you just can't have if you haven't done it. There are no more questions in the chat. Did other panelists want to respond?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind responding to that. And I wasn't sure, Lou, if you were saying that person was the development consultant or if they were the process consultant.
It could be either one, Grace.
Okay.
I was speaking more to the role of them within the group.
Okay.
Not so much content information, it's prioritizing.
Yeah, and I would say I would generally agree with what Katie said, and with a caveat, it kind of depends on it depends on a lot of factors. But I would say in general, yes, the process consultant is the person that you should bring on first because there are lots of weighty decisions to be made. But after that person, it might be like I've been involved where the contractor was the first person hired, before the architect, before the process person, or that the architect was the first one on the scene or whatever. So it can be different, but I would say from an architect standpoint, when we get hired, either through one of Katie's RFPs or otherwise, and we're ready to start design, one of my first questions is, have you done the process work, right? And there's lots of communities that are like super gung-ho, like, woohoo, we've hired Katie, we're ready to go, we've got, equity members, and they've done no process work together. And when that is the case, it's a really bumpy road, and the architect has to do a lot of foundational work. That's why I've brought on a facilitator, because it's important to separate those roles, I think. And that groundwork is, how do we make decisions together? How do we trust other people to make these really big, investment decisions for us? You need to have that trust. And I know Katie likes to, there's certain decisions that everybody has to be in the room at the same time participating in. And I agree with that, but there are smaller, minute decisions about like, what is the kitchen design going to be? What are the landscaping, and what are the colors? Like things that are very small and don't have a black and white answer, because everybody can be right? So how do you come to agreement on that? You need to trust a small group of people to like vet all those things, to hear all the concerns and questions, and then be able to make decisions for you. So that's not something that as an architect, I've told groups to do that. It's really the process consultant that can give you the tools and the training and the practice to do all that stuff before you actually have to make really weighty decisions about the buildings that you're going to live in for the next 50 years, right? So I would say getting that process consultant on well before you do any design work is imperative.
We have another question in the chat. This is from Bernie in Delaware. He says, if we're working with a modular builder or even a local builder who has predefined floor plans, does that change the role of the architect?
I'm shaking my head vigorously because we're working on a modular project right now. It changes what we do, and it changes our permitting process, but you cannot, I would love to meet that builder, actually, the modular company that says that they can do it all. Most builders, they drop your boxes at the doorstep, and then it's all on you. They will get the permits from the state to verify that the building that they've constructed in the factory meets the codes for the region. But you still need to get a land use permit. You still need to get a building permit. You still need to, when we do modular, we have the building envelope, the roof and the siding. We do that all on site so that there's no fingerprinting at the end, because the modular factory did some of the siding and the on-site contractor did the rest of it. So when, in that situation, when there's a leak, they all point to each other and say, it's because of them, right? So there's still work to be done on site by a local GC, and the contractor, even if somebody is trucking, craning, and setting those boxes, they still have to do the landscaping. They still have to do the foundation prep. They still need to connect all the utilities. So it's naive for a community to think, oh, we'll work with this modular builder and we don't need a contractor or architect. We very much do. The work that we do is different. And it's not necessarily always cheaper. It will be similar cost. It's just that you'll get to move in a lot faster with a lot more predictability.
We have another question from the chat from Trudy Lynn. I'm looking at turning a home into 3 to 4 master suites with kitchenettes and seating areas while maintaining the full kitchen and living area. Do I need a co-housing architect?
You need a process
That's an
consultant.
interesting question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Who wanted? Who was? Sorry.
Oh, I just said you need a process consultant so that you can navigate the power dynamics of owning your home and who's going to live there and how you interact.
Good
I would
point.
say design-wise, it's definitely helpful to have an architect, whether it's a co-housing architect but somebody who understands. So if you're wanting to do it as a mini co-housing community, then you want either a co-housing architect or someone who understands community and how to make such a thing function socially.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's co-living or co-housing, you definitely need that skill set.
Yeah, I think the unique skill set that architects are trained for is to look at the big picture, not just the little building details. So speaking to what Grace was talking about with the modular, is like who's thinking about how the whole thing comes together, how it lays out on the site, what are the missing pieces, what does it mean for the building process? And then to this question, I think, a contractor's not thinking so much about how people use space, right? And so that's the unique training that an architect has, is seeing, well, how do people actually use space? Then what does that mean in terms of a specific design?
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely right.
Okay, maybe I'll just elaborate on the standardization piece.
yeah.
I know I learned this from Katie from the beginning, but something that I also emphasize is just making sure that we're standardizing everything. And that's not just the unit design, but even to the degree that you can have kitchens be standardized so that there's 1 or 2 kitchen plans for the whole building or a whole complex, or 1 or 2 bathroom designs for the whole thing. It just, every time people want to do something slightly different, meaning like, oh, we want to have upgrade packages for a soaking tub or for this or that. I think most co-housers tend to be like, well, the cost of my tub is, instead of $500, it's $1,200. So shouldn't it just be like another $500 more? It's like, yes, if you were building it yourself, that would be true. You would go buy this versus that. But when you multiply that by 30 households wanting to do something different, when you multiply that by the architect needs to make a change because the clearance requirements might be different, the contractor needs to take space in their brain when they're looking at the proposal from the contractor or the vendor to make sure, oh yeah, there's that separate tub that we need. And then the project management of making sure that it shows up on site and gets to the right unit and gets installed in the right unit. All of those things add cost. And the principal activity that the team has once we start going is that we're building the building that everybody has agreed to. So each of those individual standardization things become, not to say that it's a difficult thing, but when there are 30 of them, us trying to track them, they become distractions and they drag everything down. So even though it only costs a certain amount of money, the overall cost to the project schedule and everybody moving in when they think they're going to move in is it's hard to put a number on that.
I think if I could jump in here.
Too. Yeah, go ahead.
I think, anybody's trying to build anything in America today is facing the same issues, that construction costs have really gone up a lot. Lumber's just zooming through the roof. And I think people often have unrealistic expectations about how either an architect or a contractor can manage a budget. Because you don't, we're projecting forward into, what we think we're aiming for construction cost a couple of years, potentially from when you start that first design work. So I find myself increasingly, I feel like I'm such a downer because I get on early stage groups and I just say, you don't realize how tight these budgets are. You can't add anything. But it really is. I mean, it's a shock out there in the world. And I think anybody in the building industry is shocked right now at the cost of construction everywhere across the country. And so I think what I would advise for a community is to get real about your budget early on. You do a budget first. Don't start any design of anything without a budget. So then you know what you're trying, and make sure your architect understands that, and hopefully there's an agreement of what we should be budgeting for and on the construction cost, and how, and how do you get there. And then the whole group really needs to work towards that. So that's where Grace was talking about that. It's always just one little thing here and one little thing there, and then you end up, and it's hard enough with the best disciplined project to be able to meet a budget in today's world. So I think getting real about your budget and what it will take to meet that budget. And then really working together as a community, that you together don't rely on your professionals to be the bad guys, that you as a community are reinforcing that together. We had an experience decades ago with the Frog Song community in Katati, and they actually, they came when we started working with them. They said our number one thing is holding our budget and trying to keep this as affordable as possible. And to this date, they are still the community that was best at actually following instructions, and really reinforce that over and over again. Is this the best we can do for affordability? So, I just, can't say that enough, is that it takes everybody on the team to try to meet a budget. And even when everybody on the team is working together, you still don't control it, because we don't get to control when lumber, has doubled in price in the last year, right? So there is, I used to think that if I was smart enough and I worked hard enough and I put in enough hours, as an architect, the bids would come in on the budget. And I have now officially been around way too long to tell you that there is so little we get to control. So I think it actually, in today's environment, starting with the very disciplined design that is, where you are stacking units, or you're standardizing everything you can, and then the community, then if the community can clearly identify your priorities, if we have any extra money, we want to put it in this. That gives you really great guidance to your professionals on how to work with you. Communities are good at that, right? Very few communities are good at prioritizing. And so we want a little bit of everything, a little bit more there, a little bit more here, a little bit more there, and it all adds up to too much.
Let me break in. We have a question from Bernie, which may be our last. We're running out of time here. Bernie, do you want to go ahead and ask it? Unmute yourself.
Sure. It's a really stupid and basic question. We're just getting started in our community planning. So when we're thinking about a budget, do we think about how much each member will be willing to put into their own home, or the budget is everything? It's the common house, it's the land, it's the shared spaces, it's the individual homes. But then I'm not sure how that works legally when we each buy a mortgage for our individual home. So if we paid $400,000 for our individual home, and then it would all be an additional $50,000 for the common house. I just don't understand how that works.
Yeah, so as someone who runs a lot of budgets, it's one budget for the development of the whole project, and the common house is part of what you are buying. So the common house, the cost of the common house, what most people want is you want to wrap that into your mortgage. So just like a standard condominium development with a pool, when you buy in there, you buy an undivided share of all the common areas. So there is one budget for the project, and then you are pricing different sizes of homes with different amenities relative within that budget.
The confusion comes when because we are not used to, average people are not used to developing things. When you buy a house, the cost of all of the architectural services, the contractor's overhead and profit, the cost of buying the land and bringing the utilities in, the cost of building the road, or any taxes or fees to pay for future schools or for future utilities. All of that stuff gets rolled into your home sale price. So even though you think you're paying for the cost of the house, all of those things are included in that home sale. It's just that when you're buying a house off the shelf or through your realtor, you don't get to see each one of those line items and pay for them out of pocket yourself.
All right. Thank you very much. One of my jobs is to keep us on time, and we are out of time. Boy, you have, this has been a great panel. We've been exposed to some of the best architects in the co-housing world. Thank you very much, Mary, Katie, Grace, and Molly.
Thank you.
Thanks.